Hello, all you big, beautiful brains out there. Today, we're going to talk about foot in the door and door in the face. Before we get started, take a minute to subscribe to Psy vs. Psy. Help out your friendly neighborhood psychologist while I tell you all about foot in the door and door in the face. Foot in the door and door in the face are two highly studied effects in the field of social psychology. Social psychologists are trying to understand why we behave the way we do in social situations. Both foot in the door and door in the face involve social pressure on an individual in order to alter their behavior, and so they're really interesting to social psychologists. Let's talk about what each one is, and then we'll talk about why they might not be all they've been made out to be. The name foot in the door is a little weird, but it's based off of a technique used by door-to-door salespeople. Apparently, some more aggressive salespeople would literally wedge their foot in between the door and the door frame in order to keep talking to potential customers. Foot in the door is all about making that small initial request, working your way in. In foot in the door technique, one person starts with a small request and then increases the size of the request to get to what they really wanted. For instance, if your friend asks you for $1 so they can buy lunch, it doesn't sound like that much. You'd probably give it to them without really thinking. The next week, they might ask for $3 or maybe $4 or $5, and you find yourself agreeing without really thinking about it. At least until you notice you've been buying them lunch and now you have no more money. Foot in the door is what social psychologists call compliance technique. Compliance here just means getting somebody to agree to a task. In foot in the door technique, psychologists think that the reason we agree to that second, larger request is because it further validates that initial, smaller decision to say yes. And even though the name is kind of odd, it's been called this ever since the 1960s, when the technique was first studied by Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser. The door in the face technique is basically the exact opposite of foot in the door. In door in the face technique, you start with a huge request, which you know is going to get turned down. Or, to borrow that same salesman phraseology from Friedman and Fraser, the door is going to get slammed in your face. But this huge request is followed up by a much more reasonable request, which is more likely to get a yes. Door in the face technique was first figured out by Robert Cialdini in 1975. In his experiment, he asked participants a massive favor to volunteer as counselors to juvenile delinquents for 2 hours a week for 2 whole years, knowing that there was no way any of the participants would probably say yes. When they inevitably said no, Cialdini asked the participants to volunteer as chaperones for a 1-day trip to the zoo, the smaller request. He found that half of the participants agreed to the smaller request when they were first asked to do the really big 2-year-long favor. A completely separate group was asked just that small request about taking kids to the zoo, but only 17% said yes. That's about 3 times more likely to say yes just by preceding what you really want with a much bigger request. Here's where it gets tricky. Most of the time, when I hear about foot in the door or door in the face in a non-scientific setting, TikTok, it's usually in some sort of psychological hack video about how to get people to always tell you yes, or how to get anyone to agree with you. And that's misleading, to put it nicely. Remember, in Cialdini's original experiment that we just talked about, still only around half the people said yes. Your likelihood of a yes did increase, but it certainly wasn't 100%, even when things were preceded by that bigger favor. One of the suggested explanations for door in the face is that people often feel guilty for turning down the original big request. But we all know there is a lot of variability in things like how guilty people feel, and a lot of things can make these effects just not as effective. The time delay between first and second request, who is asking, whether you're being asked to do something good or bad, and even the gender of the person being asked have all been scientifically shown to alter the effectiveness of foot in the door technique. Other things could affect these techniques as well, from the mood of the person being asked to the experience level of that person doing the asking to the general attitude towards the size and reasonableness of the requests. For instance, I could ask you to do a small favor, like clicking subscribe down below. But that doesn't mean you'll agree to my next favor, in all expenses trip paid to Disney World. The size and reasonableness of the request matters. So just make sure you take these psychology hack videos for what they are, and keep in mind that while these two techniques are effective, they aren't foolproof. If you want to know more about the dangers of listening to psychological hack videos, make sure you click on the link to see our video on that. And if you want to know more about other social psychology compliance techniques, make sure you subscribe so you can see our upcoming videos on some of the lesser known compliance techniques, like the that's not all technique, the lowball technique, and a personal favorite, the foot in the face technique. Make sure you subscribe to Psy vs. Psy so you can get all of our other videos and you can learn all about the science of psychology. Until next time, keep thinking, and I'll see y'all later. Bye!